what we're going to do, we're going to look at freight houses tonight. If I can get things to manipulate here. Being Ron's brought the subject up in the last few days. I told Greg when he didn't have anybody that, well, I have a few photos. Let me see what I can put together. And at this stage, I have got 139 photos to show you. So we'll see if we can do that. You can see the CB&Q is a wood structure. We got just a single door on one side. This very well may have been the truck side, tracks. You can see the boxcar there, tracks on the other side. So are you seeing my pointer, my cursor moving around?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Here is the Milwaukee's freight house in Omaha. And here you can see this is a brick structure, a series of doors here with bumpers in between the doors. So this may have well been the track side. I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with the building, but nice big lettering on there with, look, somebody's put in white plywood in the windows in between the letters. So here is the UP's.
Just a minute. Go
Yep.
back on that. You said that was a Milwaukee Depot one. That's an Omaha,
Oh, you're right, it is in Omaha.
and it happens to be up in Minneapolis.
Yep.
Or St.
Yes.
Paul.
Well, when I found the photo, it said Omaha on it. So
That's
Omaha Road, excuse me.
I know that because I just found that a minute ago, or this afternoon. You can't credit me with remembering things.
All right.
It also looks like there's an elevator penthouse on that, so it was 2 stories high.
Yeah, very likely with the windows on the upper level. That
Either
would be,
that or it's a building behind and that has nothing to do with it.
yeah.
The picture that I found on that doesn't show that other building.
I think it's the building behind, guys.
I think so
Yeah,
too.
that voice would know. He lives up there. Well, moving on. This is Union Pacific's, this is Denver, Colorado. It was titled Union Pacific Docks and Freight House. It looks like we've got the freight house over here on the right side with a concrete pad. You see 2 tracks sunk down there in between the dock going around, and then you get more tracks and then a roofed over open area. Interesting, looks like we got a couple of empty car trailer or car hauler semis on flat cars here. So, but this would be a very large freight house terminal with multiple tracks. You have 2 tracks together. There'd be a very possible bridge plates between the cars, but the way they got this set up looks like they got a track has got a dock next to each track, so they could unload and load freight. It would go into the building for transfer to trucks or for storage temporarily until the owner could claim it. So here is the Rock Islands Freight House in Little Rock, Arkansas. This is 1962. And you can see it's a large 2-story building. We've got a covered dock here on the one side for trucks to back up to. On the other side would be tracks. So freight cars could be parked alongside and be loaded and unloaded. So, and of course, with freight houses, you also often have a team track or a ramp of some sort nearby. So I have no idea whose ramp this is, but it's typical of the typical wood ramps. So we had the discussion here recently about Cedar Rapids. We were focused on the Pennock and Ford facilities there, but here is an aerial photo of Cedar Rapids, I think from the late 40s, early 50s. That what I want to point out is the 4 freight houses. You had the Milwaukee Freight House right down here by the river. Then a block over was the Illinois Central Freight House. Right across the street from it was the Rock Islands Freight House. And then over 2 blocks more, you can see this, I think, Chicago North is marked Chicago Northwestern Freight House. And the Chicago Northwestern and Rock Island main line went up through here somewhere. So, and you can see the freight houses are all fairly close together. So it was easy to move a car from one to the other through an interchange or move via truck, move parcels, etc., back and forth. So here's an aerial photo of Mason City, Iowa. This is the Milwaukee's freight house here. And of course, you see other structures and buildings all marked around here. So here's another view of Mason City, a different angle. Again, the Milwaukee Freight House, but then down over here in the corner is the Chicago Northwestern Freight House. Way up at the top of the photo, you can see a depot. That's the Milwaukee Depot, in the main yard, turntable and roundhouse were back over in here. And out of the picture, way off to the left of the Minneapolis and St. Louis. But notice how the freight houses are down here close to the downtown area, even somewhat removed from the yards. So here is the Chicago and Great Western Freight House in Chicago. Got it, looks like an open building somewhat here, and then the freight house and depot and the river. Those of you who know Chicago can tell us what all this is. So moving on, here's another photo from Chicago. This is 1943, Chicago Northwestern's freight house. This is a Delano photo taken during World War II. What's really, you know, it's an early color photo and all the red transfer trucks. Here's another same time, same photographer, a close-up showing the cartage and the different brand companies, and yet all similar red trucks. So here is yet another Jack Delano photo of inside where they're transferring freight in and out of a Chicago Northwestern boxcar. And you can see they're using the standard what we would call warehouse cart, pushing that stuff around. Here is a joint freight house down North St. Louis. This is Rock Island, CE&I, and the Frisco. You know, it's multiple tracks in between two sides of the building. You got the outside here where the wagons and trucks can come up and load and unload. Inside you have multiple tracks, and these cars probably have bridge plates drop between the doors, and so they would be blue flagged. You could only move the car when the blue flag had been removed, and so they probably worked this on a shift rotation, shove a string of cars in, let them sit there for so long, and then pull them out when they were told to. But this is a rather large complex. You got a 2-story over here with storage or maybe even offices up on this upper level. So here's another shot of that building. Or no, this is the St. Louis and Southwestern Freight House in North St. Louis. So, and again, the truck bays on one side, but this multi-story storage building. Here we see a Chicago Northwestern freight shed, or not Chicago Northwestern, New York Central. I get, my mind's all clouded from the drywall dust and leaves. I do not know the location of this photo. I just know we got a New York Central switcher here shoving some cars in down along the low roof. That would be a typical of a freight shed. So, and this photo is it's a New York and New Haven was titled a freight terminal. Looks like early or mid 30s. We got some horses here. We got some early 30s, even to old Bulldog Mac. Freight terminals were often where freight was transferred from rail car to truck and vice versa. And this has got to be somewhere out east. I have no idea where, but gives you an idea how busy they can be. And notice all the open trucks. They would be loading freight for local deliveries probably. Here is St. Paul, Minnesota, the Chicago Great Western Freight House. This is the front of the building. You can see the trucks backed up here from the street. And then here is the track side of the same building. So with, can't hardly see the tracks, but the doors where they would line up cars. I hope you're all studying the architectural features of all these structures because there'll be questions. No. Here's Kansas City, Missouri, the Gulf Mobile and Ohio freight house off a yard. You see we got 3 tracks here with, notice how the box cars are all, they've been uncoupled. They're all lined up. So the doors are all lined up with the entry into the freight house. And there will be a steel bridge plate crossing between those doors so that freight can be moved in and out of those cars. So. This photo is of a Lackawanna depot or freight house. We've got a dock here with a bunch of stuff stacked on it. And then over on the other side of the tracks, there's a more of an open dock with some things. I do have close-ups here. The close-up, what we see is we got a bunch of baby chicks sitting here being loaded into a passenger, probably baggage car for delivery. So you can just hear them cheeping away, can't you? And then here's the dock on the other side. We got cream cans, milk cans. And again, a baggage car. So the Lackawanna was doing a lot of agricultural shipments on from their freight docks. So here's a photo in Ohio of the Wheeling and Lake Erie. This is taken in 1925. Looks like we got some cream cans and barrels, and we got a dock worker here with his hand cart. So very, and you know, very simple wood structure with a hip roof and loading dock around so trucks could back up in here for loading and unloading. We'll get a little bit closer to home. This is Fort Dodge. This is the Chicago Great Western Freight House in Fort Dodge. You'll notice it's a long brick 2-story building. Look at the nice archways, the brickwork on the archways there. This is trackside here. Here's a closer shot of the office and head house complex at the end of the freight house. This is, again, the freight house. You can see the doors there. Notice how they're numbered so that they could spot cars at a particular spot. And then here's a photo of it when it's actually got a train running there. So we got a motor number 53 and RS2 moving some box cars in, brakeman standing there on the ground. So this is Boone, Iowa. This is the northwestern yard showing the offices and the freight house, which I believe is that building over there. So this is northwestern Ida Grove. We've got a depot here with a steep pitched roof and then a passenger overhang. But then there's the freight house across the tracks with the dock for pulling, leaving a box car there or a flat car for you know, you could unload stuff. And then the local people could pull up on the other side on the roadside with their wagons, trucks, and pick up whatever had been delivered there. Even the interurbans ran, they had freight and freight houses. This is Fort Dodge, Des Moines and Southern Freight Station. This is also in Boone. Here's a much smaller one. This is Pella, Iowa on the Rock Island, a nice little wood structure. I love how the windows have been boarded over and either the photographer is standing crooked or the building's got a little bit of lean to it. But you can see it's not a very big building, but it's there. Here is the Rock Islands Freight House in Grinnell, Iowa. This is a very early photo. I love the tower up on the roof. And this is the highway going through Grinnell. If you're familiar with Grinnell at all, this was the main highway. And this freight house was just on the east edge of the highway. The depot is a couple blocks down street toward further east. But we've got a wood loading dock here. We got several doors. It looks like we got a bay window here. So this has the look of an old depot to it. So, and then we got a Rock Island delivery truck behind here and the stairway going up. This would certainly make an interesting model with the board and batten siding and the stairway. So, in Des Moines, you had the Rock Island. They had a freight transfer. This is a photo taken in 1852. Notice we've got a hook here with some sort of an overhead crane We're in an open area with a lot of large crates and some trusses back there. These fellows look like they're nailing boards on for the crates, or they're undoing them. I don't know, but just so. This is in Washington, Iowa. This is a brick freight house on the Rock Island. This photo was taken in 1968 by Charlie Franzen. Again, we got arched doorways, which very typical with brick was you would do an archway because you didn't have to put in a steel plate to hold up over the doorways. So, and then you have a couple windows and a door with steps here for the office end, but you had a loading dock here and tracks alongside. So this is an early photo from 1910, 15, and Ottumwa right along the river, but says the freight houses are down there. This would be CB&Q freight houses and warehouses there. So the larger communities with a lot of traffic in and out, you'd certainly have them, but the smaller communities, you think, going back to Pella's not that big of a community, but they had a separate freight house there. So Sheraton, Iowa on the CB&Q, but Sheraton had two branches that left out of there. One that came up to Indianola and the other one that went south to Leon and on down into Missouri at some point. And so the freight house might have very well been for transferring items from the mainline traffic going through to the branch line cars. So this is the CB&Q freight house in Burlington, Iowa. You see you got 2-story at one end, probably where the offices are, and more offices and storage upstairs. And then you got the long freight shed with the doors for cars to pull up in a loading dock of some sort. Here's a similar building. This is in Keokuk, Iowa. This is CB&Q again. Got a Burlington route, open billboard up on top there. We got a horse and wagon backed up to the street side. Track side would be on the other side of the building. This is an interesting situation. This is Rockville City, Iowa on the Milwaukee, and I got Milwaukee labeled wrong. I do that once. I'm not a Milwaukee person, so I do that once in a while. But this small building over here on the left side of the photo was the freight house building. And when I lived in Rockville City, this building was still standing, and a few months later was gone. And I learned that it had been moved out to a local farm, and the lady was going to use it for an antique store. At that point, the depot was owned by a historical group of some sort, and they were in the process of keeping it up and keeping it restored. And they agreed to this move of the freight house with the understanding when the lady stopped using it, it would be moved back into Rockville City, which I think it has been. I think it's back there now. But you can give an idea. You had the station track run behind the depot and down to the freight house where you got a loading dock, got some barrels there. And then you get a very nice depot. This depot still stands in Rockville City, and they've done a nice job of preserving it. Rockville City was served by 3 different railroads, the Illinois Central, the Milwaukee, and then the Fort Dodge, Des Moines, and Southern had a branch that terminated in Rockville City. So this one's Omaha, Nebraska, I believe. Chicago and Great Western Freight House. You had a number of railroads in Omaha. So this is a brick building, single story. Got the street side here with the wagons and early vehicles, and you got rail side on the opposite side of the building. That way the workers inside could move things back and forth across the platform and the floor of the building to waiting cars or waiting trucks. So here's the Des Moines and Central Iowa building in Des Moines, Iowa, freight house. You can see we got track side here. We got a little bit of a dock. We got a shed overhead to protect us from weather on both sides. So, and Des Moines and Central Iowa was a small, more of a terminal railroad urban line in Des Moines proper. So they handled a lot of freight in between different railroads there. So this is the Chicago Northwestern Freight House in Des Moines. And you can see it's a much larger building, 2-story. You got all the loading docks here with the doors, with tracks coming up alongside. Looks like we got a bunch of barrels stacked there on the dock, waiting to be transferred to a car. So,
Doug, got a
Yeah.
question. Go
Yeah.
back one slide.
this one?
Yeah, notice the overhangs are tilted toward the building so that you don't get water running down the side of the car.
Yes, actually,
that
you'll
neat?
see that on a lot of the freight houses.
Yeah,
Yes.
cool.
Yep. And then you've got a gutter and downspout.
Yep, yep,
So, yeah, and I think this was so that the water would not be dripping off the roof and getting the contents wet. You know,
Yeah.
if you're unloading sacks of flour, you don't want water dripping on it.
nope.
So, yeah, so good catch. I noticed that, but I hadn't said anything. I'm not an expert on this stuff. I just found photos and I like to talk. So, well, now let's get a little bit closer to the railroad I like to follow, Minneapolis and St. Louis. Here is, this says Minneapolis and St. Louis Freight Office upstairs, and the photo is labeled the Eminencing Freight House Crew, and we'll notice Pat is highlighted right here. So, but that's quite a crew. That's a lot of people to work in a building. So it's very possible this was in Minneapolis, but it's not the Minneapolis Freight House. So I'm not sure where that. This was the Minneapolis Freight House for the Eminencing. This is from an evaluation done in 1934. This is a big 2-story brick building. So I'm not sure where that crew was working at. So here is the Eminencing Freight House in Fort Dodge, Iowa, also taken in 1934 from the same valuation. And yes, this is a street that's on a slope, and the building is dug down into the ground there. And if I remember right, this building still stands there in Fort Dodge. So this is the freight house, Eminencing Freight House in Des Moines, Iowa. This was over on the east side. And this is the street view. This building, I don't know if it still stands or not. I can't recall. So, in contrast, here's the freight house at Albert Lee. This sat between tracks in the yard, whereas you can just see the edge of an RS1. I cropped this photo pretty good to get a view of the freight station. The depot itself at Albert Lee was over on the left side as we're looking south. But notice we got an Eminencing trailer backed up to the dock. And then you've got a flatbed semi here with curved arches. There was a truss company adjacent to the Eminencing yard in Albert Lee that made trusses. So this very likely is a load of trusses that may be getting transferred to a flat car or gone. So this is down at the south end of the Eminencing. This is Albee, Iowa. They had a joint depot with the Wabash, and then they had this separate brick freight house building. This building still stands. It's now owned by the local school district, and they use it as storage, but it's out in the open. You can go down there and wander around, take pictures and measurements however you want. So Eminencing had other joint freight houses. This is one out in Watertown, South Dakota. It's a Rock Island and Eminencing depot. Photos from 1934. Sure has the look of a Rock Island depot, the BCR and N vintage or variety. So, but it was a joint freight house with them, Eminencing, because I think they built a separate joint depot in town. So, and then the Eminencing used other structures. This is in Oskaloosa, Iowa, again 1934. I think this is the former CB&Q depot in Oskaloosa, which was about a block or two east of the Eminencing depot. The Eminencing acquired the CB&Q line coming into Oskaloosa in 1934. And so they probably turned the depot into a freight house and had it lettered as such. So here is the freight house up in Waseca, Minnesota. 1980s, look like it's been repurposed by a local electrical service company. We got a lot of transformers there, but it's still in that green that the Eminencing was so famous for. So here in turn is the Eminencing Freight House in Monmouth, Illinois. Typical board and batten arch windows, a wide brace, large braces on a steep roof overhang. So, and here the water is going to run onto the boxcar and then drip off onto whatever you're unloading. So, before we got really started, I mentioned Grinnell. This is what is known as the Freight House in Grinnell, Iowa, but it really looks like a depot. And I think before the turn of the century, this probably was the Eminencing Depot, or the Iowa Central Depot, I should correct myself, in Grinnell, Iowa. And then when the Rock Island and the Eminencing built the joint brick depot with the nice turret, this got relegated to just the freight house. This was a couple blocks below a couple blocks south of the Diamond. But we got this standard platform here. We got a bumper here for the truck to back up to, and they could transfer products back and forth. So here we are in Bartlett Yard, Peoria. This Chicago Northwestern tracks running along the side here, but this is the Eminencing Ice House. But over here is the Eminencing Freight House. And then in the back was the Quonset hut, where if you're an Eminencing fan, a lot of diesel local photos were taken. But this little flat building here is the freight house and office. Passenger service was downtown Peoria via the Rock Island, but this was the freight service here. So now we're going to get a little bit closer to home, my stomping grounds. This is Marshalltown, Iowa. I model Marshalltown. This is the Eminencing Freight House here. And then this was a secondary building that was built on the adjacent to the freight house at a later time. We are looking east. We got the Northwestern main line coming in here. We got these boxcars are sitting on we got the Great Western coming in. That's the tracks we're staring at right here. These are Eminencing tracks here. The Eminencing crossed all these tracks because their service facilities were on the south side of this yard. The Great Western came in and crossed all these tracks here, and they departed out of Marshalltown heading south. They came in from the northeast, headed southwest. And of course, all this was bisected by the Chicago Northwestern. Kind of an interesting study. Here is a broadside of the freight house. You can see we got a boxcar here. We also got a truck backed up to it. We got one of the Eminencing gantry cranes handy here. These are an interesting structure. This building off to the far left is a Standard Oil distributor. And this was served by the Eminencing with the track on the other side of the freight house. Here is the north end of the freight house building. You can see a nice concrete block up here with the Eminencing letters stamped into that concrete block. By the time this photo was taken, this whole freight house complex became part of a lumberyard operations. And this was a building used to store insulation and other such items. So here's another shot looking down the site a little bit. The end we're looking at was the office end of the building. And then you can see the wider overhangs down here where the cars would be moved in on tracks for loading and unloading. So here is a photo from 1934 showing an end of the building that hadn't been seen in decades by people, because I mentioned that auxiliary building. It was built right here in this open area. And this nice painted Eminencing Freight House sign is painted on the brick was hidden by the second building. And so it was not seen by many people, did not even know it was there. So there you can see the tip of the gantry crane just above that New York Central boxcar. I do have drawings for this freight house. Somebody asked about drawings. Drawings of such structures do exist. Every railroad was a little different, and whether they had standard plans or not, I can't say, but we do have a blue drawing of the Eminencing freight house at Marshalltown, Iowa. And you can see the office complex. You can see the freight house. You got a little restrooms right here, loading docks on both sides and covered. So Remember I mentioned that sign at the end of the building? Here you can see that auxiliary building, a huge number of vines had grown up because the lumberyard did not maintain this whatsoever. But we learned it was getting torn down last year. And so Roger Ward got permission from the lumber company to go in and take pictures. So I'm going to show you a series of photos that Roger took of this interior of the structure. But first, he found that this painting, the paint was still on the brick, covered by vines. You can just make out the word freight, and you can see the Eminencing Lcl, and then here's the other part of the sign. So the Eminencing Lcl Freight House was still painted on the end of this brick building, even though it hadn't been seen in decades. That was kind of exciting. So here we can see some of the overhead. Notice how they've taken plywood and boxed in the truss ends or the supports. I suspect that was to keep the birds from nesting there. This is an interior shot. You can see the ceiling's already starting to collapse. This building had needed a roof 20 years earlier and they had not done anything. And you can see windows are busted open. Here's, you can see the freight end of you can see it's just open trusses there. It looks like it's got wire mesh that's been stapled up again, probably to keep the birds from getting down into the materials that were stored there. But you can, at the far end, you can just make out the rooms. Here's here's a shot of one of the doors. The west side of the building had the overhang had been enclosed in with corrugated sheets, and you can see the bags of insulation that were laying there. The doors on the freight house end were standard barn style door that slid on an overhead railing, and then they had clear story glass above that to let light in. So here is you can see the rafter supports, and you can see the green paint. So and here's this is the west side where it's enclosed a little bit. Here's the east side where it's opened, and you can see where that overhang has been extended at some point. And you can still see the green paint. You can just see a little bit of the wire mesh that's been put up there to keep the birds from nesting on this side. And down here in the corner, I can just make out that Standard Oil building that I was mentioned earlier. But it's interesting how this overhang has been extended in some fashion, probably for storage by the lumberyard. And here's looking the opposite direction on that side. But, we were so hoping that we could maybe salvage one or two of these support beams when this was getting torn down, but it was
Corbels.
not. Huh?
Corbels.
Corbels, yes. But it wasn't feasible. We couldn't get in there. Here is an interior shot. You can see the brick pillars, brick walls, the wire mesh overhead. Here's a little bit closer up. This is more in the office area where we got the beadboard ceiling. You can see the outlines of some of the bead. This is the door that you came in, and this was the public area where people came in to stand at the counter to say, I want to ship something, I'm here to pick up something. And so, but nice wood beams and stuff. Would have loved to have gotten in there and tried to salvage some things. They wouldn't let us get in, and they were already starting to tear it apart. So here's another shot. You can see where they've removed the walls dividing all the offices, so that this had been several different offices in here had all been torn out, probably by the lumber company. But it would have been probably was a magnificent building inside at one time. You know, it just. Here's a close-up of that office entry area. You can see the concrete. The salvage company or the demo company did try to salvage this concrete block. They were very careful about it, but it broke in half as they were taking it down. Turns out it was not a big block. It was only about a 4-inch thick piece of concrete, about like a sidewalk that the letters have been stamped into. And as they were trying to get it down, it broke. So it went to the landfill like everything else. But here you get a really good look of that green color that the Eminencing Lcl painted everything. So Here's, again, windows boarded up. Roger was able to salvage a couple of pieces of this green trim wood. So I have a couple hunks of it in my basement now, so I can see what the proper green is to paint with. So here's one of the doors. Would have been nice to been able to salvage one of these doors, but again, destruction was, they wouldn't let us anywhere near the building, and they were knocking it down pretty quick. So but yeah, just yeah, last April, I believe it was, we wound up having snow that weekend, and they had already got started, and we're using these big excavators to just knock it down. We'll just go through a series of photos so you can see the demise of the freight house. Went over there for part of a day, sat and watched. It was sad to see. What's surprising was this was all on a big concrete slab, poured foundation and concrete. And there was a partial basement under the office area for the furnace and things. So, but here you can see, get an idea of how the type of truss structure that was holding up the roof, and the wall was a multi-thick layer of brick. And yeah, they just used this excavator bucket. They just went in and started smashing stuff, knocking it down, and then he just kept hitting the pile and smashing all the lumber up into smaller and smaller pieces. You can see the remains of one of those corbel supports bolted to the wall. And here he is. Just then they were loading all the rubble up in the dump trucks, hauling it away. So.
Back up, would you? One, couple shots. Oh, okay. I was wondering what this stuff, maybe what these things were laying down here in the yard, but I thought maybe it was rail, but it's not, just something.
There was rail along the side here, and I think there was some rail in there, but this is more, the lumber yard had been using this for an outside storage area. They had, we'll get a couple shots here a little bit more that I think will, either that or I weeded them out. But they had, yeah, here you got shingles, framing material, siding and stuff was all stacked up along here, along the fence where we were on a public street watching this. And there was a fence, and they, so, but you can, but it, you know, this is the office end that's starting to come down. And it was surprising how quickly they loaded it up and hauled it all off. Here you can see, this would have been the public entry into the office complex. Nice plastered walls, wainscoting, you know, chair rail. This was pretty nice at one time. Now, if you want to scratch build rafters, there you go. Here you can get an idea of what this was the last little section that was left standing. And you can see all the type of stuff the lumberyard was just storing in here. So if there were rails, it was long buried and stuff. So here's a close-up of the last two freight doors. Then they knocked those down. Then we had the concrete slab left. And that was the end of the MSTL freight house in Marshalltown as of last spring. Now, Ron mentioned something about LCL in one of his missives. The MSTL did have a LCL freight, train, and truck schedule. They published a booklet. I think this was in 54 or 56. And here's the cover and with the new merchandise schedules and a sample page. I'll show you some close-ups here. This was the listing for Marshalltown, outbound to the different towns, and how it would be there in one day, and stuff coming into Marshalltown from these different locations on the MSTL. Notice that at the bottom they had this little code that, you know, asterisk was for tri-weekly, this S was for same day, T was for truck, C was for way car, or C was for car, or WC was for way car. And you see in Marshalltown, most of this was going by truck or a car, basically a box car. If they were shipping to Minneapolis, they would use a box car to St. Paul. A box car would be used. Otherwise, everything went out by truck. And the same with everything coming in, except for Peoria and St. Louis, coming in by car, but everything else coming in by truck. Here we've got Mason City. Well, notice the branch line Hampton to Belmont, they're using the way car or the caboose for handling LCL. And they did have some side door cabooses. One was assigned to that branch line. Otherwise, they're using trucks again or cars. And you can see some are the same day and others are one day apart. Going through this booklet, I could see where some were 4 or 5 days, depending on where they were going to. But you might want to, okay, let's look at Eminencing LCL Trucks. There you go. They contracted out with local carriers. This was an early Mack rubber tired solid tire tractor, but we got balloon or pneumatic air-filled tires on the trailer, and it's Colonial Warehouse Company, but it's been leased out to the Eminencing L. So this is one side. Here's the other side of that same rig. So then we get into, a little bit later, we got into more modern stuff. This is Brady Transfer and Storage. They were based out of Fort Dodge, and they were the carrier in Iowa that the Eminencing L contracted with for all their LCL service. So, and there's a pretty typical trailer that was used. Now here is, the Eminencing L also owned a fleet of trucks. And here is the X23. This was a delivery truck for LCL shipments from depots out to various communities and probably even homes. So in Minnesota, they used the Spalacy Motor Cargo Company. And this is a Diamond Rio tractor with a trailer all lettered up for the Eminencing L. So, and then in later years, this was a Spalacy trailer in the bright red and white scheme. So this would be post 1956. Again, LCL merchandise. So now other railroads, there were a lot of ways of handling it. This is a demountable motor truck body in Cincinnati, Ohio. It's just we got a very early 1920s chain drive. But notice the overhead crane winch lifting this box. Here's another photo inside the transfer building. So that, and you can see the guys with the carts loading up these boxes that then would be taken out by the crane and loaded onto the truck for delivery. So we thought this happened years later, but no, it was happening early on. Of course, this was the other way that LCL got handled. It was you just had the local merchant or local farmer just back right up to a boxcar that they had conveniently parked at on an open area, or even sometimes they would just block a street and they would just back somebody's truck right up to the boxcar door and unload whatever they were receiving that day. So here's a couple photos. These are LCL handling at Ackley, Iowa. This is on the Illinois Central. You can see one of their IC trucks there, but here's someone, local flatbed. It's got some bags of stuff and a couple cartons there. Here's another shot of it being, looks, maybe it's appliances or something that are being transferred out of the freight house end of the depot. This depot building still stands in Ackley. It's now used by the Historical Society. It was housed city offices for a while. And this elevator still stands back here, but it's pretty decrepit. So here is the Santa Fe. This is in Kansas, maybe on the Kansas side of the Kansas City area in 1940. But you can see all the carts loaded up with packages of LCL as they and the open covered building here. So, and then here they are, same area where the boxes are getting stacked inside the car. We got drums, barrels, boxes labeled and where they're going and stuff. So Now, of course, we did have also early containers in Gons. We've seen the Athearn model of things like this, et cetera. These were LCL containers, very typical with the railroads out east. This is a Baltimore and Ohio Gon. New York Central had stuff like this, Pennsy, and some of the other railroads out east, but they're using a crane and a flatbed truck. They're lifting the container out of the gun and putting it onto the truck. Here's a photo of a Pennsy gun with a bunch of LCL containers. These look like they got top hatches, so these might be containers for something like cement or sand or whatever, but that's how it happened. Now, this morning, someone posted he built a model. This is the Mopac Freight Depot in Leavenworth, Kansas. And notice the arched windows, and notice we got a door here. They had tracks that went inside the building, so they loaded and unloaded inside the building. And we got a 2-story here at one end for the offices and stuff, and a large warehouse. And this was Tim's model. I don't know who Tim is, but it came through on an email this morning. He based it on that photo, and he certainly had to truncate it, narrow it, and truncate it in length. But he's got the tracks going through the arched doorway. So nice tribute. So
As Chuck Schwartz did it.
I thought it was Tim.
Oh, you're right. You're right. Tim Coy.
Okay.
You're right.
Right.
You're right.
Okay. And then here's Clark's model of the freight house up of Mason City. I could not find a photo of the Eminencing Lcl Freight House in Mason City. I'm sure I've got one somewhere, but here's Clark's rendition of that. So now I also came across the government in its wisdom does all these studies. This is the IC Freight House in Dubuque, Iowa, and they've got a series of photos that they have published on their website. This is after the Central whatever took it over, the IC, but you can see it's a nice big 2-story at one end, long freight house with doors on the other end, truck sides and rail sides, and just then they had what I found interesting is a little tin covered. They had this open platform, and someone put a little tin roof over part of it so you don't get wet when you're loading your truck. Windows have all been boarded up. But if you wanted to model one of these, this series of photographs would be, this is a 2-story brick standard DPM building sections would certainly like to do this. What was nice though was they had photos of the interior. This is the upstairs interior, and it's a big open room. No doubt, it might have been used for storage of more valuable LCL type stuff. No doubt there was probably, it looks like a small office here. Not sure what the mattress is doing in there. May have been homeless had taken it over, but here's another shot of that open room. There's no walls dividing this. So now here's the freight house end of it. This is that long lower. You got the overhead beams. Looks like some tire dealer is using it for storage. You got an overhead door has been installed instead of the sliding doors. But it gives us as a view of what happens, what these structures look like inside. And that's the last photo I have. We've done this in about 45 minutes plus, Greg. So you can get to class.
Well done, well done.
Very good.
Yep. Well, I like to collect photos, and yesterday I started putting this together after I talked to Greg, and I found a few more. And then like the IC stuff in Dubuque, I found that this morning. I said, oh, we got to include that. That's just good stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting to see, like you said, the inside and some of the different configurations. I noticed those roof lines seem like they're backwards, but you could also see on that photo there were some pretty hefty pipes taking that water off the roof.
Yeah.
And depositing it somewhere. Couldn't really tell where, but.
Well, the railroad did not want to get a bill for damaged goods. So
Right.
they did.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, we got some stuff in the chat. Oh, Omaha do. Yeah. Yeah. Just want to make sure there are no questions. So,
Well, I was gonna say though, you had a lot of freight houses that were combined with the stations too. Here
yeah,
in Minnesota, we had a lot of, I photographed quite a few of them that were combined station and freight house, where they might have only one door or two doors because you had the Sears, Roebuck and the various other catalog companies were really big into the LCL business for various towns.
and small towns didn't have big shippers. It was stuff coming in, like you said, the Sears and Montgomery Wards and whatever, and the local
Yep.
ag people getting things, but you didn't have a large manufacturing plant. I think the bigger freight houses, like I showed you photos of, was where you had several railroads or large manufacturing where they were bringing it to that building to ship out or getting supplies coming in. So, and transferring between trucking and railroads and stuff. And I know there's been articles done through the years, and I've seen clinics on these large transfer freight houses. Some of them even had the automatic carts with the little cable in the floor or something like that, would pull the carts around. So. But this was,
A point on the Northwestern in Chicago, they have the big X on the door. And those were strictly transfer boxcars between the freight houses and stuff.
yeah. Yeah, from downtown out to Proviso, things like that. Yeah. So,
One thing I noticed on the floors, I worked at Alice Chalmers in LaPorte for a little bit, and their floor was basically railroad ties that were cut. They were basically 18 inches and put on end, buried into the ground. And I noticed a lot of those freight houses had floors like that. If they didn't have concrete, they had that type of thing.
oh, okay.
I found that out because I was up on a ladder and I found out how slippery those railroad ties are, and I went. "Whoop." So
I've seen that kind of, and on old streets that they, originally before they had other material to make the streets.
but
Mhm.
one of his shots, I think it was around. I tried looking at the number. It might have been like 25 or 26. Don't go back right now, but it had, you could really see the detail of that. I just wanted to bring that up.
Question, on the small lines where there's a small freight house, who did the unloading? Was the train crew
A lot
taking?
of times it was, sometimes a station agent, sometimes they had their family living there. And some of the family might unload it, or a couple I talked to said they would actually have the companies that it was their product. They would have them come unload it and bring the truck and you do it yourself.
Yeah, if a car was left there, but if it was in a local train with an LCL boxcar, the train crew might be roped in unloading, or a section hand who was handy. So it depended, yeah. So,
I suspect the train crew was probably they did most of it.
the brakeman and the conductor would be,
Of course, they had full crews back then.
yeah. You had a five-man crew, so you'd have a couple guys who could be, if they were parked there and the engineer was getting a cup of coffee, the brakeman would be unloading the LCL and the postmaster would be getting the mail or whatever. So,
In 1959, when I went to work, I shipped a toolbox once by LCL, and I'm sure it was out of Milwaukee, out of Tama. That was the last time we ever did that. So that's about the time when LCL was gone. It was about 59. After that, there wasn't much of it.
Well, that's your Eisenhower 1956. The highway construction began, the interstates across the country, when trucking really started to took a while away from the railroads,
Yep.
starting in that era, 56, 57 on up.
yeah, and I showed you the Eminencing LCL schedule, and that was published in 54, 56, as the railroads were scrambling to try to retain or gain back those shipments. So they were publishing new schedules and, hey, we can handle your loads. We got the trucks, we got the people, whatever. But it just didn't happen.
Some railroads even painted their cars specially for that. I think the New York Central and maybe the Missouri Pacific. I often wondered if the Eminencing, that was kind of the beginning of their big green, but Gene Green says no. Says that had
No.
nothing to do with it.
Yeah, that schedule I showed you, the back page, the back cover is an advertisement for their new green boxcars. But nowhere does it say anything about them being used for LCL service. It was just to let all the customers know they had new boxcars and they could service their needs. So.
I guess
very
that's
good.
one thing.
Oh,
I-
sorry,
I
go ahead,
need-
Ron.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ron.
Oh, I was just gonna say, maybe that's, I need to try to find the pictures of the special freight cars. I'll get that done in the next couple of days.
Yeah, because, the New York Central Pace Setter, the Pennsy had them, the Baltimore and Ohio had them. I think C&O had some, a lot of the Eastern railroads especially.
Yeah, but a lot of railroads also just painted a door orange, market merchandise service.
Yep.
Or they had a couple orange stripes on a boxcar door for that particular type of traffic, the LCL work.
Mhm.
Could you go back to a picture?
I could try, yeah.
Okay, it's a double-story brick building. About halfway through your presentation.
Are you seeing the presentation now?
Yep.
Yeah, I am. Thank you. Keep going down past the deconstruction. Oh, you went too far. There you go. I'm watching that little block, that little white rectangle go up. So keep going a little bit further. Keep going. Two-story brick building, pretty big. And start slowing up. Okay, go a little further. There it is. That's it. That's it. The Chicago Northwestern Des Moines. Okay, there are two on top there. There are two elevator freight house, or excuse me, two elevator hoist houses on that building.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Wow, those are big ones.
Hey, guys, I gotta go. So thank you very much, Doug. Thanks, everybody, for coming. No meeting next week because I have a school show, and then we'll resume at our old time, which is 6:30 Central, 7:30 Eastern.
okay. You guys can
Gotcha.
send me questions via email.
Bye now.